And thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone to the INET Oxford Thursday seminar. I'm Eric Beinhocker, the Executive Director of INET Oxford, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Jonathan Rose as our speaker today. Apologies that this was originally supposed to be an in-person event or a hybrid event, but there's a little wave of COVID seems to be going around, and we both had some potential exposures. So just to be on the safe side, we decided to switch it to a virtual event, but hope everyone will still be able to participate that way. Jonathan is first and foremost a friend, an old friend. I think I've known Jonathan for probably about 15 years now, and we've been collaborators and had great discussions and kind of fellow travelers on a long journey to understand how we can create an economy that is supportive of a flourishing environment and flourishing human beings. And Jonathan has a quite varied background. He's the founder of the Jonathan Rose companies, which he'll probably describe a bit more. Has done amazing work to pioneer the actual practice of creating sustainable communities and environments. He's also, with his wife, Diana, the co-founder of the Garrison Institute, which is an amazing place that brings together scholars and all kinds of communities for discussion and contemplation. And I've had some of the most both mind-expanding and enjoyable meetings at the Garrison Institute. And Jonathan is a visiting fellow at the Said School at present. And so we're very lucky to have him in Oxford. And he's going to be presenting today on regenerative business. And he's warned me that this is a brand new presentation, some new ideas that he's going to be trying out on you. So I know that he'll be looking forward to some feedback and discussion. So Jonathan will present for a while, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Eric. And it's great to see you virtually, and it's great to be here in Oxford. I recently had an article published in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, which this talk is based upon, but it's really based upon a lot of work that I've been doing over the years. And the issue is, just a second. So the issue is that there are a lot of circumstances now. There's volatility, social volatility, environmental volatility, which are indications to us that our current way of working is not working. And as we know, business is one of the largest forces in the social, cultural, ecological environment, and therefore an economic environment, and therefore, if we're going to create a more regenerative world, we need to create more regenerative business models. So as we know that the climate has been shifting and it's very disruptive, where this is the tsunami in Japan, we're seeing a dramatic increase in forest fires. And by the way, all these are not only have environmental devastation and deep negative impacts on individuals, but there are signs of a larger systemic volatility. And in fact, many of the systems that we have come to rely upon are under threat. This is really interesting. This was a screen put up in Tiananmen Square in China, and its purpose was to convince the residents that there was actually blue skies somewhere in China. That is a daytime shot. That's what the quality of air can be like in Beijing at this point. At the same time, we're seeing a dramatic increase in materialism. And as we take the values and the things of our lives that were very important to us as human beings and human culture, and we make them more material, that also increases climate impacts. The good news is the world is becoming more middle class, but the bad news that comes along with it is a dramatic increase in consumption of both materials and energy. And in many ways, we're seeing that along with that materialism, because it's not the growth of more local materials like the fantastic cheeses one can find in the United Kingdom, but rather these are global products, and therefore they're degrading local cultures at the same time. At the same time, we're seeing rapid automation. This car factory, the best I can see is 2 people in this photo, 2 human beings, and that also is creating disruption and eliminating many of the jobs that people with lesser educations were dependent upon. This is leading to this and in some ways the erosion of democracy and the attempt for the rise of democracy. We're seeing a lot of tension around the world, but there's a lot of political volatility now. This is as the riots that took place 10 years ago in London in the summer 2011. And this is a map of where the riots took place. So in this map, which is a map of London, the deeper the red, the greater the poverty. And what you see is that the riots didn't take place in the poorest areas. They actually took place on the edge of where a lower middle class neighborhood met a middle class neighborhood. They were the places in which second generation immigrants felt that there was an invisible line that they could not cross, that they could not move ahead in society. And so although previously I described kind of consumption issues and environmental issues, there's a really important social issue. And that is the lack of opportunity in an environment, in an economic environment, in a capitalism and democracy form that offers opportunity as its purpose. Also interesting in the financial sector. So this is the ESG materiality map of one of the top 10 banks. So if you look at the ESG materiality maps, you'll see on the left side is the axis of increasing importance to stakeholders. On the right side is increasing importance to the business. And the upper right corner is ethical behavior. And if you look at all the 4 largest banks in America, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Citi, and Wells, in the upper right-hand corner, the most important thing is ethical behavior. And so while we see this rapid acceleration, and we've seen this for several decades now, the financialization of the world, what the stakeholders are saying and what the business is saying for itself also is that more growth is not what we need. We actually need more ethical behavior. In thinking about this, we at the Garrison Institute have created a framework for this. We say is that there are four components upon which a regenerative society is based. The first is what E.O. Wilson called the half Earth, but we really want to call the whole Earth, and that is biodiversity. E.O. Wilson said we have to save at least half the Earth to preserve 85% of the Earth's biodiversity, but biodiversity actually is the source of life. 2.5 billion years ago, we had only single cell organisms, and this amazing synergy, this collaboration, this integration between different organisms is what's created the increasing complexity and magnificent beauty of life on Earth. That really is the basis of everything. The next image is actually an image that somebody did of a future of London, what an ecological civilization would look like here. And whenever you see future images of civilizations, if you Google them, they all have much higher density. They have very green transportation systems and a lot of nature woven inside them. These seem to be commonalities of what people are looking for. But so an ecological civilization is one that is more in line to support the nature of life, which is the key of biodiversity. And typically they are higher density, mixed use, green, and weave much more of nature in them. And so in an ecological civilization, it covers how we build, how we buy, what we make, how we create our energy, how we dispose of our waste, etc. To achieve that, we need a regenerative economy. And I want to note that an economy is purely a mental construct. Money is purely a mental construct. Things like gravity are real. Things like sunlight are real. The economy is completely something we made up. There have been thousands of economies throughout the Earth's history and in our many cultures. Some are much more reciprocal. So the economy we made doesn't mean it's the economic system we have to live with. It is a very important way in which we take our values and turn them into value. And we need to think of how we can adjust the one we have to make it more regenerative. And the last thing is the common good, that the idea of the commons is really, really essential, and the common good, that if everything that we do is about self-maximizing and self-optimizing, we will never create a regenerative world. As long as everybody's about either maximizing the individual or maximizing the firm or maximizing the country or the nation. So the idea of the commons is really, really important. In English history, by the way, there's a very important counterexample, which is when the commons was enclosed by the enclosure movement. And in essence, the wealthy people, when there was a change in agricultural practices, took the lands that had been public and made them private. Farmers who then didn't have sustainable living. This happened just about the same time as the Industrial Revolution. And in some ways, it freed up farmers from their land to go to cities and become industrial workers. But in other ways, it displaced them to do that. So it'd be wondering, so the point is that the commons was a much greater part of the UK ecosystem and economic system more pre-1600. And we need to think about how we can rebuild a commons all over the world. Stuart Wallace, who is the founder of a group called We All, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, who's been working on this for a long time, has framed this, the issue that we need to focus as redistribution versus predistribution. So what one hears a lot now is, should we have a carbon tax? A carbon tax is a way of redistributing, saying there's impacts, we're going to tax them, and then we're going to redistribute it towards a common good. People raising taxes to pay for adjustments to try and solve the problem of income inequality or other, are in essence saying we're going to leave the fundamental structural issues in system as it is, and then we're going to try and tax some of the inequality benefits and then redistribute them. Predistribution says, can we get the model right first so we don't have to redistribute? And this is a really interesting example. This is a dam in Bhutan, in the country of Bhutan. Bhutan has dammed up several of its rivers. And the funds that are generated by the hydropower that it creates, or the hydropower is sold to India, and part of it pays off the bonds that were used to pay for the dams. But the rest of it goes to the country to pay for free education through high school and to pay for an amazing national health system. So although Bhutan is one of the lower income countries in the world, it has extremely good education and distributed health, because in a way it has taken this common resource, which is the rivers, and used a financial system not for private gain, but actually for public gain and for the common good. So I give that just as an example, way to think about what a pre-distributive system might work, might look like. So the first thing we need to think about, there are 7 qualities about what makes a regenerative business that I want to talk about now. So in this regenerative world that I hope we can all co-create, as I said, business needs to be a regenerative force. So the first one is the paradigm or the mental model from which the business stems. First of all, there's a mental model today about maximization, that the purpose of the business is profit, and the purpose of the business is to maximize its profit and shareholder value. And as we've seen, that's very, very destructive. Danilo Meadows made an amazing article, if you haven't read it, called 12 Leverage Points to Change a System. And one of the key leverage points, the most important leverage point, is actually the paradigm or mental model from which the system comes from. So this happens to be the mental model or the paradigm of the Mondragon co-ops, which are in eastern Spain. In 1956, a priest ended up in this area and to tend to his flock, and saw it was really, really poor, and there wasn't a lot of investment. And he convinced some of the local manufacturers, and these were like little companies of like, people, 12 people who are kind of working in a blacksmith shop, or that was very primitive making of things, that they should form co-ops. And these co-ops linked together. And today there is the co-ops employ over 70,000 people, and they have a turnover of over $14 billion. And they sell products, I think, in 70 countries around the world. And they've been incredibly self-sustaining. So, and out of this system, they have a university, and they have a local symphony orchestra and all kinds of cultural goods. And when the COVID recession came, and about, I think, 7,000 people lost their jobs because the businesses had downturns, they weren't fired. They were just reabsorbed into the other businesses in the co-op. It's a completely different mental model. So the mental model is totally about communal optimization versus any business's maximization. The businesses are all tied together. They work together collectively, and they work together for the common good and for the people. This is another model that they put out of this, which is that at the core is these basic cooperative principles that support people in cooperation. There's this joint project participation in which these are all linked together, and you get these social entrepreneurial returns. So model. So it's really important to think about what is the paradigm and what is the model. The next P is purpose. So what is the purpose of the company? And this is a picture of carpet. You think of the pictures about the cellist and the ceiling, but the picture is actually about the carpet. This is a company called Interface Carpet. And in the 1990s, its amazing founder it is a public company that makes carpet tile in the United States. Its founder was asked to give an environmental talk. He kind of thought the environment was pretty irrelevant to his business, so he assigned somebody else to get it written. It was written by an amazing thinker named Paul Hawken and handed to him. And the night before his talk, he read it and thought, this is really radical. And am I going to do this? And he said, he gave this talk that Paul had written for him, which completely reimagined Interface Carpet as a regenerative business. And they have gone on to completely transform the carpet industry and think about every bit of what goes into the carpet, every source of material, every bit of energy and water. And they have created a model that's the take-back model, in which they sell carpet tiles, and when you're done with them, they'll take them back and they completely recycle them. Using this model, the company has grown dramatically. It is also now, it has incredible employee retention because people are so eager to be part of a company with purpose, and it makes these amazing products. And they have now really set a goal. They have a factory that is completely solar powered, so it's a zero energy, climate impact factory. And their goal is to actually make everything zero, a complete closed loop system between them and their customers, and to have zero waste and zero energy. The purpose, having a driving purpose, then defines everything else. One of the things that I've heard at Said, and I've heard at many other business schools, is this question about, is there a tension between purpose and profit? And how does one manage that? And I want to point out that, just as I said earlier, the economy is a mental construct. Purpose is a mental construct. I mean, if you think about it, my sense is that nature and biodiversity in its purest form, and the universe in its purest form, it may or may not have a purpose, but I don't think it's going around every day saying, here's our purpose. I mean, it just is. And the nature of nature, the nature of life, is that it continually moves to heal itself. You think about when there's an avalanche and land gets disrupted, the forest gets disrupted. It knows step by step how to regrow itself. Profit is also, so there's an inherent healingness within nature, but I don't know if there's a purpose. There's also the profit is purely a mental model. It's purely an accounting system. We completely made up the idea of profit and that you need profit, that we need to organize an economy around profit. Or yes, again, economies could be organized about anything. And so this idea that there is a conflict or between purpose and profit is just an idea. And what I'd like to propose is that if you center a company truly around purpose, that you can read this in hundreds of articles, that profit is more likely to come, that employee turnover will be lower, that alignment with stakeholders, with customers will be higher, and that and profits can actually be enhanced. And so I don't see it as a conflict at all. To me, the only conflict is there a conflict between purpose and distraction? And purpose is very, very helpful in the self-organizing of a business. The next thing I want to talk about is product. So you can have a company with the right paradigm and a great purpose. So one of the companies I really admired in its early days was Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Ben & Jerry were incredible visionaries, and they did some amazing things in terms of bringing stability to the Vermont dairy farmers, all kinds of great things. But their product, which I love, by the way, in the end is dairy fat and sugar and chocolate and caffeine. And I'm not sure it's so good for you. So the next thing we believe a regenerative business has to do or should be doing is making a product that really is making the world a better place. So here's the very interesting joint venture between Volvo and Saab to make fossil-free steel. And because the making of steel is a very, very energy consuming process, and it's a very wasteful, toxic waste creating process. So on the left of this chart, you see the blast furnace process. On the right, you see this thing they call the hybrid process, in which there's no fossil fuels. They're using regenerative electricity. And instead of using a hot blast furnace, they're actually using hydrogen and water in a hydrogen plant process. And out is coming iron, which they're now going to be using in making trucks, etc. This is one of the early pieces of this green steel that came out. And it's a fossil fuel free fuel factory. So they're making a product which is essential, and they're making it in a very green way. So this brings us to the next P, which is process. So how do we actually make things? So I want to talk to you about the food system. This happens to be the vertical farming. You may know that that 50% of all food that is made in the world is wasted, that we could literally eliminate a great deal of the hunger problems and food cost issues even if we were to eliminate food waste. There's a lot of wonderful work that's being done on agriculture in fields. I'm a big believer in agriculture in fields, but we're also finding that we can grow food hydroponically in urban areas through these things called vertical farms. And they can create local community jobs. They can bring fresh vegetables and right to the neighborhoods where they are, dramatically reduce transportation costs, and essentially have zero waste in the manufacturing. There's waste in the production, there's waste typically in storage, there's waste in distribution, there's waste in the grocery store when products age out, and there's waste obviously in our own homes and restaurants, etc. So the process by how you make something and how the whole value chain that it moves through is another key component of creating a regenerative business. The next one is people. And one of the things we learned during the COVID crisis, something that we had known all along but didn't really pay attention to, is people are increasingly in higher and higher stress jobs. And that there's a whole category of people who we called frontline workers, and some of these were doctors and nurses, and some of them were the people who stocked our grocery store shelves, and some of them were the people who picked up our garbage, and some of them were the people who drove our buses and trains, and that how essential they are all to the system. We have created a system today that is burning people out. It's burning people out at a tremendous rate. People like doctors and nurses, not only from the direct stress of their jobs, but from something called vicarious trauma. Think of all the people who are working in humanitarian aid camps who are now had to deal with the Syrian refugees and the Ukrainian refugees and the over 60 million refugees around the world. Think about the people who are working in the communities where forest fires are devastating them, or opioid addiction in the United States. All these people, all our front-line caregivers are being way overstressed by the system. And so we now know that we have to care for our caregivers. So a regenerative business not only compensates its people well, but actually thinks carefully about their mental and social health and tries to create systems that are regenerative for them themselves. So these are just examples of frontline workers from around the world. An example of the cure of this is something called the Contemplative-Based Resilience Project at the Garrison Institute, which is invented by putting together meditation and yoga because stress is embodied, cognitive behavioral therapy, social network building. A lot of contemporary neuroscience has developed a system to help people prepare for this kind of work and actually to relieve their suffering. And one of the lessons from it is that neurologically or cognitively, there is a difference between empathy and compassion. And we now have MRI studies that deeply show this, that when people feel empathetic, which is something we want them to do, they take on the trauma and stress of others, and it leads to burnout. When people feel compassionate, the empathy is turned into action. So compassion is empathy turned into action. And some people come home from these high stress jobs, and they feel highly energized because they felt like that day they made a little bit of the world a better place. So that comes from compassionate action. And that is something we need to train. The next P is partnership. And this is the company Roche, used to be Hoffman and LaRoche, which is a drug company whose work is really to make the world a better place. And they have done this through an incredible series of partnerships. This is one of the original labs. Roche was founded on the idea of science. They were going to take science for the common good. And drug development is long, complicated, and expensive. And one of the interesting things that Hoffman LaRoche, or LaRoche now, has done is they're really in the drug development world. Every year they win the award for being the best partner. They've really set out to say, our goal is not to dominate the world, but our goal is to collaborate with the world. They have a program where they'll give a certain amount of literally square footage in their labs to young postdocs who may have a great idea for some drug study and development that they want to do. They partner with much smaller organizations that are working on interesting ideas and help finance them. They'll partner with larger organizations. They can help on distribution, et cetera. They've built a network. Instead of seeing themselves as a sole actor out to compete with everybody else and be faster, better, and more profitable, they said, we want to be the best partner in the world. And that has really, really enhanced the resilience of the company. And the last thing is profit. So what's interesting is when I Googled profit, if you Google profit images, these are just some of them, but every one of them shows profit going up. Every one of them is based on the idea of increasing profit and increasing growth. And nowhere does one find, or very rarely does one find, a discussion about sufficiency, stability, recycling of profit. And to me, one of the most important issues of our time is that of ownership. So who actually receives the profit? Where does the profit go? And the current public company model and even private company model is typically the profit goes to the shareholders versus recognizing that the sources of the profits come from a wide range of people and from the commons itself, the ecological, social, and economic commons. And what is the obligation to return the profit to that? One of my favorite companies in the world is an amazing engineer founded by this guy, Ovo Arup. The company's called Arup, A-R-U-P. I think they employ 13,000 people. They're an incredibly creative, socially responsible, environmentally responsible engineering firm with offices all over the world. They do very beautiful, important engineering projects, from new buildings to infrastructure, water, sewer systems, transportation station systems. Arup started it. It was his company, and then he brought in partners. He had partners. And as he was aging and thinking about the future of the company, he made all the partners sell their shares, and he sold a share into a trust. He created the company into a trust. And one of the things they say, every employee deserves reasonable prosperity. I love that phrase. If you really think about the balance we need in the economy, we don't need excessive prosperity, and we certainly don't need insufficient prosperity. Reasonable prosperity is a great goal for all people. The company takes its profits, and about 40% of it is redistributed to the employees through a profit share. The 30% of investments is investments in two ways. It's actually investments back in the company infrastructure. Any of you who are running companies know you're endlessly spending money on new IT systems, et cetera. But it's also investment in research and development, which is, number one, what makes the company such a cutting edge company. But number two is research and development for the common good. So these ideas are then put into the commons and help make the world a better place. And the last goes into reserves, which helps just keep the company really strong and vibrant. And we've seen, again, an effort since the 1980s for companies with vast reserves, in some cases for Wall Street forces to say these should be distributed to the shareholder versus being held for in effect, the commons of the company. So one of the reasons why I'm here at Skoll and at Said, so I'm very interested in this idea of ownership and how should profits be defined and how should profits be distributed. I said earlier that this current economic system is just one of thousands. There are indigenous ones that focused on reciprocity in the past. There are indigenous ones that many systems. Remember, I talked about England pre the enclosure movement, which there's still a importance about commons in the UK, but before that, it was really a preeminent value that there was the commons and that we reinvested in the commons. So it's a journey that I am trying to figure out myself, but that is, what are the range of forms of ownership, and how can ownership create not only more regenerative businesses, but a more regenerative world? I talked just very briefly about the structure of my own company, which is a company that we develop and we build very green, affordable housing. And then we bring social health and education programs to our residents. We work all over the country. At the core so our purpose is to create thriving families and well-being. And the well-being is both for families, the neighborhoods around them, and for the ecologies that they are part of. So this is at the very, the people that we serve is at the center of our purpose. Around that, the vehicle that we use, the platform, is green, stable, affordable, and mixed income communities. So either buy or build them. And we know that, for example, when a low-income person in the United States moves from unregulated housing, so they're paying too much of their salary to some mediocre apartment they're renting somewhere, to where they're moving to safe, green, affordable housing with a stable rent that's only 30% of their income, that statistically their lives actually extend 8 or 9 years. Just from that, because it means they have more money to pay for healthcare, for healthy food, or maybe to provide childcare for their children. So the platform itself, the product in effect that we make, is really is a positive contributor to the way we want to change the world. Around that are supportive neighborhoods and networks, that no building, none of us exist alone. We exist in neighborhoods. And communities, and around our model, which is to partner with local neighborhood organizations. So we have rooms with computers, et cetera, where we provide after-school education to kids, but we're not providing the education ourselves. Maybe it's a local school district or a YMCA or others who actually we partner with to provide the programs. To achieve this all requires public and private investment. We raise impact funds from impact investors, but we also work with city, state, and federal funding. And it's the blend of all those that really provide the vehicle to make this work. Our goal is systems change, and so we're continually trying to research what are we doing that is most efficacious, and then how do we take those ideas and put them into the public realm. We started doing green affordable housing back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. We literally were amongst the very first, maybe the first to do this work. The affordable housing industry viewed it skeptically, as did the environmental world. But eventually we were able to produce enough data and proof that the greening of affordable housing was both cost effective and environmentally effective, that now almost all new affordable housing built in the United States is built green. We have a partnership we've put together with the Harvard School of Public Health, the Columbia School of Public Health, Dartmouth's Health Department, the Health Economics Group, Enterprise Community Partners, and NeighborWorks. And this consortium of these 5 organizations has now been working on studying the efficacy of these social health and education programs we're doing, because we really want to figure out what are the most effective things we're doing, so that we can then advocate for with public policy for those to scale. And that's really where you get systems change. I mentioned how we did very early models of green affordable housing, and ultimately those models changed the system. So we're now trying to do that on the social health and education side. Our company has about 3.7 billion worth of projects. We're in 8 offices across 17 states. This is a little out of date. We're actually, 18,000 units at this point. And I want to end and just show you what a project looks like. This project will open in about a month. It's in East Harlem in New York City. It's almost a full city block. It's affordable housing that houses a range of people from formerly homeless to middle income. It's the largest passive house project in North America. Passive house is a very green standard used for energy conservation that came out of Germany. It has a 50,000 square foot charter school within a fantastic local charter school called the Harlem Children's Zone. It has 12,000 square feet of social health and education space run by a local not-for-profit called Union Settlement, and which will bring meals and health programs to low-income seniors, after-school programs to the kids, job training for young adults, wide range of projects. We have a community-based art center, and we have this most amazing community garden system that flows through this. This actually follows the pathway of an old Lenape Indian trail. And each of these little pods that you see, one is children's play area, and one is a contemplative meditative pod, and one is a science pod that actually has a map of the stars above, below. There's an amphitheater within this. All the plantings are Mannahatta plantings. These are the species that existed in Manhattan before 1491, before settlers came. And so we're actually trying to rebuild the indigenous biodiversity, and we do that in all of our projects. I'm going to skip these. These are just some common environmental and social features that are common to all of our projects. And I want to end with 2 things. I mentioned nature and how nature knows how to heal before. We're now learning amazing things about forests, and how deeply forests are integrated, and how in many cases 60% of the nutrients that the leaves of a tree will create go not to the tree, but are shared through a root system to those in need. That if a tree is being stressed by insects or whatever, that those around it will actually send it nutrients through its roots and put out pesticides through its leaves, etc. This whole system is integrated by the microfibers of mycelium. It's an incredibly nurturing, supportive, generous system. that makes forests work so well. And to me, that's really what we need to think of the business world as. Can we make businesses, the business ecology, work like a forest? And I want to end with this quote from Christopher Alexander, a great architect, which is, making wholeness heals the maker. I believe the function of business is to make wholeness. And in doing that, in the making of wholeness, we heal ourselves too.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan, for both a very interesting presentation, stimulating, but also a very hopeful one. You gave us, a lot of examples of people thinking and doing things differently that show that a better way is possible. Just before we open it up to questions and comments, maybe I'll kick things off with a brief comment and then a question myself. You mentioned the conflict between profit and sustainability and these other goals, and that's a big a big question and theme for a lot of people. Another perspective on that issue is that society always has placed constraints on businesses as to what are acceptable bounds of behavior, and the job of a CEO or business leader is to make a profit within those constraints, and that's often a hard or complex problem, but that's why business leaders get paid the big bucks. And so saying that one of those constraints is you should not be destroying nature and destroying our future, the democratic society says that seems entirely reasonable. So rather than saying there's a conflict between those goals and profit, you would say, no, that's just the problem you have to solve. And we wouldn't say, and just to illustrate further, we wouldn't say a CEO was a good CEO if he or she said, my business can only be profitable if I had child labor. Our reply would be, either that's a bad business that shouldn't exist, or you're a bad CEO and someone else can figure out how to make a profit, without it, employing children. Same thing with the environment. So, rather than, again, positing it as this conflict, positing it as this is the problem, to be solved, and that is your job, is to solve complex problems like this. And if you solve them, society will reward you. And pursuing a profit is not a bad thing. Profits are a hugely important signal in the economy as to, where opportunity is, and providing incentives for people. But profits are only deserved when you're solving problems for society. I don't know if you have any comment back on that, and then I'll ask my question as well.
Got it. So absolutely, I think the purpose of business should be the purpose of society. They have to be aligned, and we actually exist in a world where they're not well aligned, and that's problematic. But so there's very interesting studies about punishment versus incentive. And if you look at primates, they've observed that about 1 in every 10 gestures is a punishing one. So like a mother with a little child, and she's holding the child. Imagine a mother ape, and she's holding the little child, and she's grooming her. And then the child does something wrong, and the mother swats her, and then goes back to grooming her and feeding her and stuff like that. So what they've determined in primate society, the kind of ideal ratio is 9 good things for 1 kind of corrective thing. And it seems that translates pretty well to people. So what we have created, though, is a culture that says, so if the 1 corrective thing is government regulation, let's say, that we're free to do whatever we want on the other 9, that we don't have a moral obligation. So regulation, in a way, prevents the worst of bad behavior, and it sends some corrective signals. But we need a value system. We need a whole other thing to make, I don't think you would not get the creativity of business if all we did is just follow regulations. So, but the other, so let's just say 1/10 of what we do is following the regulatory side, and the other 90% is the kind of creative freedom. If that creative freedom is, as you say, really devoted towards a purpose, which is solving society's needs, that would be great. Unfortunately, we have these other purposes out there that I think that that actually, for example, have said in the past that it's okay to have a business about child labor. Now, very interesting. When Sam Walton was alive, the founder of Walmart, for those of you who are American and old enough, Walmart's motto was "Made in America," and everything they sold was made in America. Sam Walton dies, the company changes its philosophy. Its philosophy is, I don't know what the logo is, but it's something like cheapest every day or whatever. And they started actually pushing their suppliers. They actually said to their suppliers, if you make your jeans, we won't buy your jeans unless you make them in China because they'll be cheaper. We want your jeans at half price. We're going to introduce you to a Chinese factory because you haven't figured this out. And they literally forced the supply chain to go to the cheapest places in the world. And in the beginning, I'm sure that Walmart, I presume, is a much more responsible company, but in the beginning, it was like, we just want the cheapest price. So we need to be really explicit in society. So these are a series of choices. There are actually a series of value choices in the history of Walmart. So we need to be really explicit as a society that it's not just that we won't tolerate or we will punish child labor, that is completely inconceivable in this system.
And I guess what you're pointing out is and this comes out in, say, Sam Bowles's work. You do need the hard boundaries of regulation and laws and things, minimal standards, and I would say, drawing some boundaries around the biological impact, business is having is appropriate. But what really makes things work are the cultural norms and behaviors,
Right.
that then drive the day-to-day decision making. Now, my question is scale. A lot of the, we've had a variety of models and examples that have been around for a long time. Co-ops, the Mondragon example is a wonderful one. That's been written about a lot, and I always find it fascinating. But the one thing that we know that has scaled over time is shareholder capitalism. And so my question is, are there other models that you see that could scale in a way that shareholder capitalism does that would be a real competitor to it? Or is the name of the game making these changes within the broad structure of shareholder capitalism?
So I would say that shareholder capitalism has scaled so rapidly because it has ignored the feedback of its effects. So, we can pollute and it just goes in the air and it's not my problem. And we can burn coal. So very interesting. Children in America now are advised they can't have more than 1 or 2 tuna fish sandwiches a week because tuna fish has so much mercury in it, and the mercury comes primarily from the burning of coal. So, so shareholder capitalism, I guess, in its current form is that it's totally fine to burn coal if it's the cheapest source of energy and make electricity that way. And we don't really care for poisoning children. And by the way, mercury, destroys brains. I mean, when children have too much mercury, it leads to lifelong neurological negative effects and disabilities. So just because something has scaled doesn't, it sometimes it's scaled because it's amazing, and sometimes it's scaled because it has ignored the values and constraints that it should have responded to. If you look at ecosystems, so for example, the idea of a tree has scaled magnificently. We got trees all over the world, but they're all locally adapted, and there are many, many thousands of kinds of trees. So that's what I guess that would be my answer is there are certain key ideas that make a lot of sense about business organization or business products, et cetera. And those we absolutely can scale, but they need to be adapted to local niches. So local is not just physically local, but kind of and ecologically, but socially, economically. There are these, society is not a monoculture. It varies enormously. And so what you want to see is businesses that that co-evolve in that monoculture. What we're really trying to create is an evolutionary structure. And monocultures don't impede evolution.
Excellent. Well, let's open it up to questions or comments. If you have a question or comment, please, you can either hit the little raise hand button or just turn on your screen and give a wave.
Yeah, I'd love to see you.
Seems we have Heather. Yep, please go ahead. Nice to see you.
Great. Thank you so much for this. It's very heartening and inspiring, encouraging. Thanks for giving the example of Bhutan. And I'm interested in, are there other countries that have tried to take their economic systems? I mean, again, this is a question of scale, like that we were just speaking about, but on the national level, are there other countries that are good examples where they have taken a large shift in how they arrange the economies? And I guess my first thought is always Scandinavia and how decisions are made there. Are there others? Or yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
So there is a fantastic network of governments. They're creating what they call well-being economies. And there are 5 of them now, and they have formed a network called WeGov. And there is, so they are Wales, Scotland, Iceland, Finland, and New Zealand. And 4 of the 5 are led by women leaders, by the way. And if you go to their, you can go to Scotland Wellbeing Economy or New Zealand Wellbeing Economy. You'll see the national economy is framed as a focus towards well-being. And there's another organization called WeAll, W-E-A-L-L, which is the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. The Garrison Institute happens to be a member. And you can go to weall.org and you'll see all this information. And by the way, there, if you're involved with organizations, you can join. I'm sure the Blavatnik School, they'd love to have as a member. WeAll is this alliance of over 200 organizations, all working to support the ideas of WeGov. And they have seminars and programs, and you can see a whole ecosystem of people doing interesting things.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Well, maybe just to wrap us up, Jonathan, if you were, advising, well, maybe you'll be doing this, some of the students at Said or other places who have ambitions to, do these kinds of things in business and, carry this torch. What kind of experiences and priorities would you advise them to get? What do you think are sort of the main skills needed for someone to bring these ideas from theory into reality?
So the first thing is you do need to know how the current system works. And if you're going to go into a business or even a not-for-profit, not-for-profits are in a way organizations. They're like a form of a business that just has a not-for-profit structure. Is different tax status, but they're entrepreneurial organizations also. So you really need to understand the way the world that you want to be part of works, that how it is financed, how it sells, how it makes its things, how it does generate its profit. Because if you want to change something, you have to understand what its core condition is. I often get asked a question, would it be better to work for like a big company where I could really learn a lot about systems that may make something, a product that's not so good, versus should I work for like this little startup or a tiny company that's like doing amazing things, but, and I used to say to people, work for the bigger company. This is like decades ago. Work for the bigger company, really understand how the world works, and then you can move to the smaller one. That's completely changing now. So first of all, there's some big companies that are making major advances in trying to make the world a better place. And we're seeing a rapid rise in the impact in investing world, in the ESG world, in which there's a lot of pressure on larger companies to be more purposeful, more environmentally and socially responsible. And these companies need you. They actually need bright, younger, trained talent that knows how to help the company achieve its goals, but knows the company how to shift its goals too. So, but also there are, younger, smaller, or more entrepreneurial startups that are also, I'm seeing, incredibly re-envision the world and reimagine. Just one that comes to mind is a company that is using mycelium. So this is funguses, basically, to grow a leather substitute. So it looks like leather can work for shoes and wallets and pocketbooks and belts and stuff like that, but it's actually grown out of nature, grown out of biological materials, and apparently has waterproof characteristics and scuff characteristics and all the things you need. That's like a really interesting idea. So, so this is very, so I view that there's no one intersection point, but to know that you have to balance organizational health. So you got to make the company has to be alive to be able to achieve its purpose and societal and environmental benefit.
Thanks, Jonathan. And we have one final question in the chat from Sandy, who asks how the person on the street can apply pressure to make these changes happen. We've seen consumers do play a powerful, role. The demands for, greener, cleaner, healthier products has helped, industries from organic farming to electric vehicles to all kinds of things, get their start and begin to scale up. But it's not happening fast enough. As Sandy says, there's a problem now of time. How do we accelerate this change, and how can consumers and also citizens as voters play a role?
Right. So number one is consumption, to try and shift one's consumption to more sustainable consumption. The second one is to, if you have a pension fund, is to vote your shares. There are all these shareholder propositions these days to try and reform company practices. And we recently saw the Exxon board change. The shareholders voted in a greener board, which is kind of amazing because Exxon was the company that completely denied climate change and actually paid for people to go out and publicly deny climate change. This is going to be quite a shift for Exxon. And and being very involved in one's local community in terms of democracy and thinking about and trying to, again, on one hand, a vote is a drop in the bucket. On the other hand, every single vote really, really matters. So to look for the leverage points in your own life, I think they all add up. And then to the extent you want to be an advocate and try and convince friends or grow groups, or Eric, one of the things Eric studies is agent-based behavior, kind of what happens when a bunch of individuals do have a certain behavior that then becomes a collective behavior. And there's a big network effect in individual behaviors, so don't discount it.
Excellent. Well, that's a great optimistic place to wrap things up. We've just gone to the top of the hour. So just leaves it to me to say thank you very much, Jonathan, and I think we're very much looking forward to your continued visits to Oxford. It's a great example of how hugely valuable it is to have people who are not just thinking about these issues, but actually also practitioners who are engaged in doing things in the real world. So just like to close off by thanking all of you for joining, and thank you very much, Jonathan.
And Eric, thank you so much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.